Welcome to Simulator Review, helping you find quality flight simulation with the world's most comprehensive listings and reviews of simulators. A warm welcome to this episode of our podcast for the flight simulation community. My name is Alexis, and in this episode, as always, I'm joined by my two colleagues from simulatorreview.com, Andrew.
Hi there.
And Elliott.
Hello.
Firstly, this is our first episode in 2021, and we want to wish you a very happy new year from simulatorreview.com. Let's hope 2021 is a bit less disrupted than 2020. Welcome back to the growing number of regular listeners to our podcast. We are pleased to have you back. For anyone new to the podcast, we are pleased you found us. You're in the right place for the top podcast on simulator venues and getting the most from your simulator experiences. We hope you stick around, and we do recommend episodes 1 and 2 for a great introduction to us and our website simulatorreview.com. This episode will be part of a series of 2 looking at 2 of our recent articles we put on our site about preparing for a simulator session from the point of view of a novice and from the point of view of someone who is more advanced. In this episode, we'll be having a discussion about how you can prepare and some tips on how to get the most of your session on a day from the point of view of a novice. And in the second part, which will come in episode 19, we'll talk about how you can prepare from the point of view of someone who is more experienced. Before we get on to our discussion though, it's time for our regular simulator news update, where we cover news both at simulatorreview.com and in the wider simulator community. And for this, we go over to Andrew. So, Andrew, what have you got for simulator review news this week?
Thanks, Alexis. There's not really a lot going on with the Christmas holiday season. I thought I'd just ask around the simulator review team to see what they've been up to. And it looks like Infinite Flight has been quite popular over the last few weeks. Particularly, Al has been rather busy flying around the world. I've got to grips with a little bit of ATC on the training server. Haven't done so well so far. And I believe you have done a bit of flying yourself, Alexis. So even though at Simulator Review, we're looking at the big venues and where you can go to fly a proper simulator, it looks like these apps and software are perhaps a growing part of that market and something guys can use, particularly with venues closed over holiday time or for other reasons. And that's something I think the team's been enjoying doing. Al, I think you're currently in Japan, is that right? Leaving Narita?
Arriving to Narita. Basically, I sort of set off and went somewhere to go and have a look. And then I thought, where can I go from here? And then, where can I go from here? And it's much quicker to load the app if you set off from the last place you arrived at. It's already got the scenery and everything loaded up. So, it's a second time around the world at the moment.
It's probably a little geeky, but we enjoy doing this stuff and the app development itself. So, Al, I know you've enjoyed flying the new 7.5 model. That's looked really smart with the different liveries. And Alexis, you were telling me that they've got some changes coming up at some point, buildings and clouds, and that's really going to add to the ambience of the app as well.
I've been an early adopter of Infinite Flight from when it first came out a number of years ago, and now it's really developed into a really good simulator for your mobile device. I think just having a flight on that is enough to get your fix in between either playing on your home simulator on your PC or going to a venue.
Yeah, I sort of poo-pooed this stuff when I remember you chaps talking about it a year or two ago, and I thought it's a bit silly. So I had a go myself, particularly on the ATC, which I've enjoyed more, I think, than the flying bit of it. It's actually a really good application. It's low cost, easy to set up, and as you say, you don't need all the hardware bits. And the changes, particularly the cloud and buildings and things like that, as they develop it, I think are going to really add to that application.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, they've recently, they're constantly updating some of the aircraft. Some of the models they have are quite old now, but they're bringing them up to date. So the ones they've had last year were the 777, and also they've now updated the 757, and we all had a flight around in that the other week, and it's a really good aircraft now to fly. They've announced that this year hopefully there should be additional things coming to it, which include buildings and clouds, which will really add to it as well.
Nice. A couple of shout outs, because you guys are on it in terms of the flying bit quite a bit more. So if some of our viewers were to see you around, is there particular call signs we should look out for? Is that something you want to share with both our listeners?
I'm happy if anyone sees a call sign and it says 84 Echo Lima after it. That could be a big clue.
Nice. And Alexis, for your good self?
Yeah, so I tend to fly for my VA that I fly with, which is the Air France KLM one. So my call sign's usually KLM 112 Alpha Kilo. So that's if you see me with that. Or usually if I'm flying as another airline, it will usually be 112 Alpha Kilo at the end. That'll probably be me.
Nice one, thanks. You can see Alexis is at a serious level. He's flying for the virtual airlines. It's serious business. That's really all we had, Alexis, in terms of the news. It's a bit of a quiet few weeks, so we thought that was quite an interesting thing what we've been up to. Hopefully next fortnight or so we'll have industry will start to wake up after the Christmas time, and we'll have some more news then.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Andrew, and we'll look forward to the simulator news on the next podcast. In this episode, the main topic of discussion is about preparing for a simulator session. So you've booked your voucher, arranged a date and time with your venue. So what next? Is there anything you can do beforehand to prepare? And what can you expect on the day? As a novice, this may be your first ever visit to a simulator. Hopefully, we think we can help answer some of your questions and give you some tips and advice which will help you get the most out of your session. Due to popular demand again, it's time for Andrew to take up the podcast left-hand seat and act as our cruise pilot for the podcast and get some more command hours under his belt in leading the discussion. So over to you, Andrew.
Right, thanks, Alexis. Yeah, this cruise time is really helping the logbook. It's brilliant. But thank you very much for that. So a while back, I think around July 2020, Al wrote the article on how to prep for sim session for the less experienced of us. And so we thought it'd be really useful to do this as a podcast. And as you said, the second one will be for the more advanced level. So one of the things I do is the preparation time at home. How does this help you when you turn up to a simulator?
Yeah, I think it's a must. These sessions, as well as being good value, they are quite expensive still. So the aim of this article was to try and make the most out of your time in the simulator. And we thought a good way of doing that is a little bit of preparation at home. And we thought of 3 things that you could do to make that better. The first one is being the displays that you're going to look at. So you're going to look at a primary flight display and a navigation display, and they're going to be the 2 screens that you'll find right in front of you. So it's some good websites out there, Smart Cockpit. Have a Google and find some flight decks there that give you a few labels. Some of them are interactive as well, so you can hover the mouse over and it tells you what each bit does. And then secondly, have a good look on YouTube, because there's some fantastic channels out there and flying from various airline pilots who perhaps enjoy the limelight, and they filmed a lot of their approaches, a lot of the instrumentation, a lot of out the window, and also what's going on in the cockpit, so you can compare movements of the controls to how these movements are reflected on the displays, and then outside what the combo of those two are actually achieving in the real world. So if you had some familiarity with these displays, then you would be at a significant advantage to just walking in. Secondly, have some idea of what you'd like to achieve. So if you're an absolute novice and you're not sure, a suggestion would be I'd like to be able to take off and land at the end of the session. If you'd like to see a particular feature or city, do that. And most instructors, as you turn up, will be able to accommodate pretty much any request. So don't worry about this. All instructors will have a plan anyway, and they'll be prepared for you and your arrival. They do this all the time, so they'll know exactly what to do. But certainly when I've taken people in the sim and they come in with a list of what they'd like to do, it makes my life a lot easier, and I can accommodate this. I do remember being in the sim with Alexis once, and it gave me quite a comprehensive list of things, didn't you?
Yeah, I was going to say that one of the things we ought to mention is that you've obviously been an instructor for a few years on simulators in the past, so you're used to kind of dealing with people from a huge range of abilities coming to you. It depends what you want to do, obviously, and it depends where you are. I think going back to your first point, though, I think this kind of idea of being familiar with what you're going into is really good as a beginner, because I remember going into a simulator for the first time and you were just overwhelmed completely by the amount of information that's being presented to you with a number of instruments and dials and readouts and switches and everything like that. And it's very hard to concentrate on or focus on what you need to do. So I think some familiarity with the basic flight controls of the type of aircraft you're going to fly and basic instruments is quite useful. As you mentioned, all those things will usually be briefed, by your instructor when you get there, either in a separate briefing room, by video, or with a whiteboard, or even potentially in the simulator. But if you could have just a little bit of awareness, understanding of those things, looking at YouTube videos, just so if you're flying a 737, how does the yoke work in relation to how the aircraft is flying? What are your basic instrumentations? How can you see how fast you're going and whether you're going up or down or what your height is? That will really help you then get the most out of it.
I think the phrase they use is drinking from a fire hose, isn't it? That's the one we commonly hear, and there'll be a lot of information fired at you right from the start. Don't expect to be able to take it all in, and hopefully your instructor will help you pick out the most important parts for each phase.
Absolutely, and I think definitely what you don't want to happen is you're just so overwhelmed that you just don't enjoy it at all. At the end of the day, you want to go in and have a really good, fun experience. Challenging sometimes, but go away and think you've enjoyed it and you want to go again. So it's important that people don't feel pressured that they have to do a lot of preparation, but it's always useful if they can do a little bit of preparation before going to a simulator, just to try and help themselves get a little bit further ahead and enjoy the sim itself.
We also mentioned in our article as well that have a look at some of the airports that you might want to fly into on Google Maps. You can switch between a map view and a satellite view. You could look on websites such as Flight Radar 24, Plane Finder, just to see sort of how runways are used, how taxiways are used. So if you decide you do want to go to Heathrow and it's an easterly wind, then they'll probably land on 9 left. So all these little trinkets, that's perhaps a bit more advanced than your first attempt, but all of these little things will help you take away the shock and all the information coming at you when you're in the simulator, and you'll have just a little bit of a better grasp when you sit in there.
I think for beginners especially, often they do like to go to their home airport. So if you live near Manchester, you might like to do a landing into Manchester. So do let them know when you go in, and they can obviously set that up for you. And even if you want to go somewhere slightly more unusual, maybe let them know beforehand, and they might be able to get some extra scenery just to make sure it looks, as good as it can do for you.
All right, guys. So we've got our favourite airport set up. So I walk into this cockpit, this flight deck thing, right? And I've got all these lights, we've got all these buttons and switches, we've got these big screens, I've got this yokey or sticky thing in front of me. What's the main thing I should look at before I get in there? Is it one of the screens I should know a little bit about? Should I understand what all the switches do? So what's just some basic things I should at least know something about to at least get airborne? What would be the main things you'd focus on? Is it a particular screen or a couple of screens I should know about?
Yeah, so my advice would be to focus. If you're going to learn about any part of the flight deck or concentrate your studies on anything before you go, and I use the word studies loosely, don't let this detract from your initial experience, but for me it would be the effect of the controls that are in front of you with the primary flight display. So that's what they would traditionally call the artificial horizon. So know that if you pulled the stick backwards towards you or the yoke backwards towards you, you would notice a pitch up on the artificial horizon. And then just what each element of that primary flight display in front of you is. If you do nothing else, that would be my recommendation before you go. Because when I do have absolute novices come into the simulator, that's what I spend most of the time going through and what they spend most of the time looking at.
Great. Alexis, for you, from it's going back a few years now, from your personal experience of being new in the simulators, can you think back of something you think, if I just understood that little bit, that would have been easier?
Yeah, the two things I think are your flight controls. So just understanding basically your yoke in front of you and the throttles next to you, and also on your display, as Elliott mentioned, in front of you. Having some idea of where you are and how fast you're going and whether you're going up or down, I think is the main thing. Don't worry about any of the other screens that are near you, engine readouts or things like that. don't worry about that so much, but it's just the main screen in front of you, how high you are, whether you're going up or down, and how fast you're going. And I think if you can just focus on that screen and also be looking out the window and have some understanding about, if you turn your yoke, how do you turn left and how do you turn right, and just having that basic understanding will help you not be too overwhelmed on your first session.
I think it's a really good point just to end this one off on, is that remember to look out the window. Particularly airline flying, the instruments we rely on so much. But if you're just learning, the basics of flying, it is just a very large aircraft that we call airliner. Look out the window. You turn left, look what going left looks like, going up and so forth. I think that's an excellent point. Don't worry about those instruments as much. So we better move on to the next one. I think, Al, you spoke about what to expect from the session and to sort of how your instructor could help you. What sort of basic things should someone think about what they want to get from a session? If I don't know anything about flying, I don't really know what I want to get out of it. So what would your advice be for someone starting out?
Yeah, we'll probably touch on it a little bit later as to what to expect for a particular duration. But just have a think about what you'd like to do. For a first time, just to be able to take off, land, and fly the aircraft around is more than enough. We call that general handling when we fly an aircraft around. Perhaps just some takeoffs and landings just to improve relative proficiency there, and that is the exciting bit. And then perhaps for a second visit, while still a novice, perhaps a circuit or use of the autopilot. Perhaps explore some more of the simulator's functionality, such as some of the systems that we can use and have to use for various phases of flight. And I probably wouldn't go more advanced than that because, as I say, it'll be drinking from a fire hose. So there'll be lots and lots and lots of information to take in. But just some general proficiency in takeoff and landing and some general handling would be a really good place to start.
Nice one. Alexis, did you sort of have little plans you'd come up with yourself when you were starting out or wish you'd had when you started?
Usually I didn't, actually. So I was usually going and, as Elliott said, the instructor would normally ask you fairly early on, is there anything you wanted to do specifically? And it was just usually plenty of takeoffs and landings. So the thing to bear in mind is the instructor will usually have a kind of a little portfolio in their mind about things that they can do and try to do with you to try and get you used to flying the aircraft and the simulator and all the rest of it. So don't be afraid if you don't have any specific things, and certainly don't worry about coming with a kind of shopping list of things you'd like to do. Do rely on them. Do kind of tell them what your level of experience is. Do tell them what you maybe like to do if you want to go to a specific airport, which is the one you always want to fly into. But other than that, do rely on the instructors.
Out of all of us, you've probably been to the greatest variety of simulator venues, I'm guessing. Elliott and I have been more focused on you just go to one simulator venue because that's what the job involves. So what should someone expect when they first rock up to a venue? What's been your experience, or what's been some of the good examples, perhaps, when people will then know what they should be expecting?
I think the good examples, or the ones that have been the best in terms of my experience, have been the ones where you get some time with the instructor beforehand. If that's 15, 20 minutes, they will perhaps ask you about what you do, what your background is in terms of flying, anything you'd like to try, but they will also then give you a bit of information about how that specific simulator works. So whether that's, we've seen some places it's through a video kind of tutorial or with a whiteboard, they'll just give you some very basic, ideas of how the aircraft actually flies. So if you turn to the left, maybe show you little models of the aircraft and the control surfaces, and that's what will happen. And that's quite good to do to try and start easing you in. I think the last thing you probably want to have, or the thing I didn't enjoy much, is where you're kind of straight in and almost pushed straight into the simulator, because you're just going to be completely overwhelmed straight away. We've also seen that some places that I've been to will have the wall posters of all the panels in an aircraft, just to kind of maybe point out the things that Elliott said earlier. So, this is your main primary flight display. This is where you'll see your speed. This is where you'll see your altitude. So just to kind of take you through those steps. So those are the best ones I've seen, that, they usually give you a cup of tea or something to sit down, have some time with the instructor, have a chat with them first, and then you go into the simulator, and you've already kind of done a little bit of understanding and briefing before you've gone in.
Nice. Elliott, when you were doing instructing with a variety of experience levels, was anything particularly you covered or you found people were unsure before they got into the simulator?
We looked predominantly at the flight director, which is a function on the primary flight display. Found that was quite an easy way to lead people round a little bit of general handling and to give a target to aim for. So most of the simulators that you're likely to go on, and probably on the computers as well, flight directors are a crosshair setup, and you just aim to put the dot on where those two lines intersect. So I used to spend a particular amount of time, whatever the experience level, just cementing that knowledge, and that did save a lot of time when we were in the sim, because that allowed us to have a very basic understanding of manoeuvring the aircraft about on the instruments, and then we could relate that to what the picture looks like out the window, and we'd slowly transition between the two.
And it's those basic things people may scoff at, but I remember taking someone into a simulator, and probably due to my poor instruction, they thought they were moving the flight directors rather than moving the little artificial horizon and the dot on that. So they had it completely around the wrong way, what they were trying to achieve. So if I'd covered that a bit better in the classroom, you just assume certain things, but actual fact, some people's knowledge level is not at that position. So covering those basics is a big help. Elliott, you spoke earlier about session lengths. I think you touched on that a few minutes ago. In your article, you go through what you maybe can expect from the half hour, the 1 hour, the 2 hour sessions. Did you want to go through some of that, perhaps to help our listeners understand, maybe sort of managing their expectations and what they're buying?
Yeah, I won't go into the detail, because come and visit our site at simulatorreview.com and read the article. It says plenty there about that. What I would say is don't sell yourself short. A half an hour sim session could look very good value, but that's quite limiting as to what you can achieve in that half an hour. Similarly, 2 hours might be on offer, and it'd be very nice to go and fly for 2 hours, but that will be very draining, especially on the first attempt. If it was your second or third visit to a simulator, then 2 hours is fantastic. So I think aim for the magic 1 hour session, and that'll give you a really good balance between learning some new skills and becoming very proficient, but also not being overloaded. And in there you'll have sufficient sort of free time and free capacity to actually look out the window and look around the cockpit and enjoy what you're doing. So in an hour, plenty of time for some takeoffs and landings, a little bit of general handling at one airfield, one location, and then you'd probably have the last sort of 10 or 15 minutes could probably swap to another airport that you fancy having a look at, and a few more takeoffs and landings there as well. Perhaps also as well starting to handle the thrust levers, because there's more than one element to flying the aeroplane, and your hands and feet are all doing lots of different things, so you could start introducing other control elements in within an hour's session, I'd guess.
And Alexis, from your experience, did you sort of increase the amount of time you were having simulator sessions, or how did you go about it?
Yeah, so I'd agree with Elliott. I think half an hour will be a very quick session. So what you'll find is once you're in the simulator, time starts to appear to go very quickly. So half an hour, you'll almost feel like you do a couple of things and you're out. A 1 hour is a really good time frame because it's not too long that you're going to be overwhelmed. I think for a beginner, 2 hours is a bit too much. I think you're going to find it very challenging and a lot to take in over 2 hours. So as a first session, 1 hour is a great one to aim for. And then as you want to progress, as you want to get a bit more advanced, as you want to try different things, perhaps even do a flight at some point, 2 hours is a great time to kind of move on to because you really have a lot of time. But I think 1 hour is a good point to do. Usually what happens, you walk in, the aircraft will be on a runway somewhere, engines running, ready to go. So take off, some general handling, how does it feel? How much yoke do you need to turn left a bit and right a bit and go up and down just to get used to the simulator? Maybe come in for a landing and then try a few different things. And that'll be plenty to occupy you for an hour and provide a really good challenge for your session.
Nice. Yeah, I think there's some great points there. We're sort of coming up towards the end, really, of this main section of the podcast. It's really, just the last top tips or things you wanted to particularly highlight for some to take away? We've covered actually quite a lot of material. Perhaps, Elliott, you first from an instructor's point of view, or things you've seen that have worked well or not well. What are your sort of top one or two things?
Yeah, basically it will summarise what I've said to date. Have an idea in your head about what you'd like to do. An instructor would love to tailor a session rather than just deliver a standard patter. That way they know you're going to enjoy the session and you're going to get the most for your money, which is what all the instructors do achieve. Have a look on YouTube, have a look at some of the instruments, have a look at some videos, get some overall familiarity with the airport and the aircraft that you're going to fly.
Lovely, thanks. And Alexis, last sort of top tips from yourself?
Yeah, I think my top tip would be just go and enjoy yourself. So although we're trying to help people as much as possible and give lots of tips and advice on how to prepare, don't feel you have to do a certain number of things to prepare. Don't feel you have to do several hours watching YouTube videos on the air bleed system in an A320 before you go to the simulator. A little bit of preparation is great, but don't put yourself under any pressure to do that. Go and enjoy yourself. Your instructor is there to make your day really enjoyable and for you to enjoy what you're doing. So if you can have one or two things you can think of that you'd like to try, that will help, as Elliott said. But even if you don't worry about it. Your instructor will have things they can suggest and give to you to challenge you and for you to enjoy your session. So at the end of the day, go to enjoy yourself. Don't feel this isn't an exam. You're going there to have a really fun time on a simulator and see how to fly an aircraft. But if you can understand some of the basics before you go, that will really help you enjoy that experience just that bit more.
That's great, and I think just for my 2 pennies worth, from a professional pilot's point of view, we see this when we're being assessed in simulators. If you approach it from a mental point of view, and I was chatting with Al about this weeks or months ago, if you approach it about what I'm going to learn from the session and try and enjoy the 2 days or so of simulated testing and training, you come away with it with a lot more value from the session, even though it's part of our job. Then if you approach it, I'm going to be tested, this is stress. It can be stressful, but it's just that mental attitude. It makes a huge difference, even at professional pilot level. So I think that's excellent. Try and enjoy it. Don't worry if you really don't have much clue to start with, but just enjoy the session or the hour or so you book. Al, Alexis, thanks very much for all your thoughts and the top tips on that. Hopefully our listeners will get something from that. So I think the skipper's coming back from bunk rest. I've got to leave the seat. So here he comes, Alexis. It's you have control.
Thank you. I have control, Andrew. So I'll leave you to go and complete your logbook for today's podcast's hosting. So thanks to Andrew for leading the discussion. As noted in episode 19, we'll have more talking about preparing from an advanced point of view for a simulator session, and that will match with the article we have on our website. So do come and join us for that. So there you go, a chat about how to prepare for a visit to a simulator with some tips which will help people if you have never been before. Do have a look at the article on our site as well, and there's lots more detail and advice for you there. Let us know what you think. What have your experiences been like visiting a simulator? If you have yet to visit one, what kind of questions do you have? Is there anything else you would like us to cover when it comes to preparing for a visit to a simulator? Do get in touch if you have any questions or comments. In our next episode, it's time again to have a look at another of the Bluepin featured review simulator venues on our database. And to remind you, these are the ones we have visited in person and done a thorough review on. We'll be having a chat about the venue and our review and letting you know what we thought, so I hope you'll join us again for that in 2 weeks' time. In the meantime, subscribe to our podcast using any of the main podcast services. We're available on Apple, Google, Spotify and quite a few others. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a star rating and review. Any 5-star reviews will be read out on the podcast. Until the next episode, it's goodbye from me, and goodbye from Andrew.
Goodbye.
And goodbye from Elliott.
Cheerio.
Thank you for listening to the Simulator Review podcast. We would love your feedback, so please do comment and rate us. Please follow, share, like and subscribe on all our social media channels, where you can see regular updates on new simulator listings and reviews, as well as our latest articles. Until next time, happy simming.